Go.
If you want to get involved, then why not? Jesus Christ. Hello, you are listening to Off Radar with me, James Smith.
Me, Neil Brock.
And me, James Eatock.
It's a movie podcast.
We can do characters that fly and shoot laser beams and do woo.
Beneath all of that, it's all about friendship.
Playing the drums until his hands are bleeding.
Each week, one of us picks a movie that all three of us either haven't seen in many years or in some cases haven't seen at all.
We each head off and watch the chosen movie, return to the microphone, then waffle about it for your listening pleasure.
Furthermore, if you want to join in and suggest a movie for us to watch, why not tweet us at Off-Radar Podcast or email us on offradarpod@gmail.com.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, share and review. It really helps getting the pod out there. For now, strap in, turn the volume up and let's go Off Radar.
I think you need to turn off Eatock's camera already.
So, hello, welcome to Series 2 of Off Radar, and here we are again. This time the format's slightly different. The whole series is all about films, and my two amigos joining me, James Eatock.
Hello.
You never get every time.
He was surprised, wasn't he? It's like, oh, is that me?
There's always a cue there for a hello. And Neil Brock.
Who? What?
Nige.
Yeah,
we call him Nige.
Thank you. Hello.
And if you want to find out a little bit more about our chats, you can go back to Series 1. You can listen to us waffling on about the 80s, the 90s, the noughties, the 2010s, Rocky movies and rom-coms. We've done quite a few. But this series, what we've done is one of us has picked a film that we either haven't seen or haven't seen in a long time. Then all three of us have gone away to watch that movie, and now we're going to chat about it. So, this week, we are going to talk about a film that James Eatock suggested that is called Red Heat from 1988, starring Arnie and Jimmy Belushi. Just one thing, when I was looking up James Belushi, I typed in James Belushi, and then it kept coming up with Jim Belushi, and I was like, who's Jim Belushi? I got so confused. I was like, is that his brother? And I didn't realise that on like the internet they call him Jim Belushi as well as James Belushi. But anyway, so Eatock,
Yes.
maybe tell us why you picked this film and a little bit about what the hell it's about.
Well, this is the thing, right? So obviously we were picking quite random films, and I think as you said in the intro, it was films that we may have seen a long time ago, or films we've recently seen, or films that we've never seen. So I chose a film that I hadn't seen because I thought, what's easy for a podcast? A really complicated meta film with 100 storylines, or an Arnie film. So I went with the Arnie film, just because I thought like it's gonna be a laugh anyway. And dare I say, oh boy, was I proved correct. It was a hilarious film. So Red Heat. You've asked me what the synopsis is. So Arnie's a Russian, and he's chasing a Russian man, and the Russian man ends up.
I need to interject there. He is
Please.
a Soviet who is chasing a Georgian man. So whilst they're referred to as Russian by the Americans, within their own country, there's quite a divide between the two.
Oh yeah, I mean it's the Cold War, so they're just the Russians. But yeah, I take on your political points and geographical references. Niger's, in this day and age, we've got to be very careful what we say. We don't want to alienate any Russian viewership. Or from that part of the world. So if any Russians are listening, we love Ivan Drago, amongst other things. And he was
played
great
by a Scandinavian.
Yes. Nigel, what is Nigel? Is Nigel become like the truth sayer or something? Anyway, that's all right. Yeah, but your accuracies within the synopsis is probably far better than my synopsis is going to be anyway. So yeah, they end up in America, and shenanigans, hijinks follow, in which lots of stuff happens. And
this is the best synopsis.
Because I'm sure that's what the back of the box says on the DVD. Things happen. Arnie's like, no, and Jim Belushi's like, yeah.
10 to 1, he doesn't speak English.
Captain Danko?
Yes.
I'm Detective Sergeant Gallagher, Chicago Police Department. Glad to meet you.
Thank you.
It's
a bizarre film, isn't it?
It's a very weird film. Like, let's just I'm not going to do a synopsis because to be honest, I sat there watching it, and most of the time I thought this is very paint by the numbers, but at the same time I really don't know what's going on. I mean, I've got my notes, obviously.
One thing to say, Etok, before you get going, is, Nigel, you don't know this. Etok messaged me earlier, and he did exactly what I did, and tried to watch the film on the internet. Go and watch it on Amazon, rent it, which is what I then did after watching the first 20 minutes with no subtitles in Russian.
Oh, come on.
Both of us did that.
You don't need subtitles for this film. You know exactly what's happening. Bad is, oh no. Good is, here we go. Oh, cop and cop. They've got same job, but different strategies. Good cop, bad cop, or USA cop, Russian cop, or wherever he's from. So yeah, the first 11 minutes I just wrote down are ridiculous. It's I wrote 3 words. I wrote Arnie, thong, snow, because that's literally what happens. It just opens up with a load of nude people in like a, what do you call it, like a, not a sauna, like
it's like a bathhouse, isn't it?
Yeah, bathhouse, that's the exact wordsmith. And Arnie sees some blokes and he's like, all right, and he turns up and he's in his little thong. Then there's just he punches a bloke through a window, I think, if I remember rightly. It was a day or so ago I saw it. I'm probably going to go to therapy because of the scenes I witnessed. Then Arnie's wrestling with some guys in snow. I'm like, what is... Yeah, I mean, even if I knew...
while he's in his thong as well.
In his little tiny pants.
Toga.
I mean, he looks fantastic. I mean, if you're casting for a film and in the script it says man in thong, it's like you want to get like the best. It's either him or Dolph at that point, and probably, Sylvester. Not the cat, the Stallone. But what I laughed about the thing that made me laugh was during the opening credits. You kind of alluded to it earlier when you were name dropping the cast. Was it came up Larry Fishburne? I was like, Larry Fishburne. I was like, oh, Lawrence Fishburne. Did he in the 80s? Was he just Lazar Fishburne? So apparently, yeah, because I know him as Lawrence Fishburne. So I was like,
it's speculation and drug dealing.
Where did you get this information?
Jim Belushi, it's weird. You kind of watch it and you think, oh, he's such a kind of... He's done a lot of shit films. That's the best way
shit. He is utterly shit. I'm sorry.
He's the, like Nigel appreciates, he's the Marty Jannetty of that, the brothers.
Oh, I like Marty Jannetty. Like,
oops, sorry.
He's the tag team partner in the New Rockers. That's how bad he is.
Yeah. He's Leif Cassidy.
It's such bizarre casting, isn't it? To have Arnie and Jimmy Belushi alongside. You might as well have had I don't know, like imagine like Arnie and young Tom Hanks at that age in there. Or
yeah, that's actually a good... But the thing is, I think it kind of works in a way. I didn't mind, out of all of Belushi's work I've seen, I would say that was probably my one where I'm like, oh, that was actually acceptable.
Now, how did you get that piece through customs?
Diplomatic immunity.
What, do you retire your uniform?
I now work undercover.
It was so full of silly, stupid shit, and they're trying to paint this whole thing of like, hey, these guys deep down they're real friends. It's like, I'm not getting this at all, because Arnie is so... Again, it's that classic bit of Arnie casting. We need a guy to play like a robot man, cyborg thing. Oh, this Arnie guy, he's got very little personality. And it was clear he was picked for this role because it's like, I can deliver lines like this. Like, no actor could devolve as much as Arnie does, if that makes sense. He's perfect for this, the fish out of water, as it were. But just like some of the lines in it, I just wrote them down. Like at one point they're walking through the precinct and you've got the typical cop boss who's like, you guys are disappointing me and all this stuff, and it's all these classic lines. And there's one bit where he's like, you need to escort Arnie. He doesn't say Arnie, obviously. What's his name? Let's call him Ralph. You need to escort Ralph.
Did you watch the film?
Yeah, I did.
I'm worried. The synopsis has taken a long time, and having watched it about an hour ago, I have no idea what happens in the version Etok watched.
No. This is the synopsis. I'm just like, I gave up with the synopses. I'm just doing lines from the movie now. So that's what bit made me laugh so much. Where he's walking down the stairs, and it's a great shot because it's them two just walking down a staircase. And he's like, you got to escort him back to wherever. And he says, he goes, Belushi's like, do I look like a fucking cab to you? And Arnie just goes, yes. It's just so good. But throughout the film, I just kept thinking to myself, when is it? I honestly believe, when you look at the Simpsons McBain parody, I honestly think it's this film they looked at more than any other Arnie film. You remember the McBain parody, which is like Arnie.
Yeah.
You look at all of you look at a lot of Arnie's films. That's not based on Terminator. That's not based on this film, that film, this film, that film. It is like Running Man or Raw Deal. It's clearly this movie because it's him walking around with a giant gun at points. And I was literally just waiting for that scene from Simpsons where the boss is like, McBain, you blew up this thing. In this precinct, we do things by the book. And then Arnie, just shoots the book.
In this department, we go by the book.
By book.
That's the scene I was waiting for in this movie. Stuff like, there was another line, he's the perfect weapon, he's a loose cannon. It's like, what? These are lines in this movie. And of course, then you've got, again with the Arnie stuff, Jim Belushi, they interrogate a criminal, and beforehand he's like, you can't touch his ass, and he goes, I don't want to touch his ass. It's just fucking, this movie is just absurd.
The fact he's actually got a kind of Russian twang at times as well. It kind of like starts off like Arnie, and then after about 30 minutes you're like, is he got a really bad Russian twang? It kind of develops as the film goes on.
You knew I would get information from the Domovich.
Well, if you watch the first 15 minutes with no subtitles, you might notice he does actually try to speak Russian.
Oh, no, yes. I know he's speaking
but
Russian.
No, this is it. Like, he spent 2 months trying to learn Russian. He did actually speak Russian in the film. When I was about 12, I thought Arnold Schwarzenegger was Russian. So, many an American producer, I think, certainly one in the 80s, probably thought that was the case. I think, in fairness to the film, I think during that period of the 80s, there was this like fascination with sort of Russia, with the Soviet Union, the USSR. We saw it with Rocky IV, with Dolph Lundgren. We saw it obviously with Arnie, and I think they tried to do something a bit different. I feel quite sorry for the director, Walter Hill. He's done a couple of amazing films. He did The Warriors. Warriors come out to play.
Yeah.
He did another one called Southern Comfort. And both those films kind of show like the really sort of down in the gutter style parts of like America. Like Southern Comfort is like Louisiana, people out on like army exercises, and in Warriors it's obviously trying to cross New York in like this sort of gangster grimy situation. I think they tried to do a similar thing with Red Heat. Obviously they go to Chicago, and it's like everyone you kind of meet in this film is a piece of shit. You've got prostitutes, you've got drug dealers, you've kind of got sort of gangsters and everything else. And so the idea kind of makes sense. It's just they put fucking Jim Belushi in this film, and everything from that point on just sort of falls on its face, because whilst you've got a concept that admittedly is like really generic, paint by numbers, he loses his partner, the other guy loses their partner, they become partners, they're both trying to chase the same man, yada yada yada. You've just got Arnie, who the director actually instructed to be kind of super straight-laced, not trying to do like funny Arnie, just like you're a big scary Russian bloke.
That you can't even touch his ass.
I do not want to touch his ass. I want to make him talk.
It's just crazy. It's such a missed opportunity, because as you kind of mentioned, if they'd had someone with like an iota of sort of personality, or just someone who can actually act, I think it would have made a big difference. But Belushi, every time he's on the screen, it's just so forced and so horrible in terms of how he's trying to get the story across. And then you've got like Gina Gershon rocking up in it, looking amazing, like great. But her character makes absolutely no sense. Like
No,
that whole bit,
not
it's
at
just,
all.
It's just
Not at all.
nonsense. It's like, oh, I married this Russian guy who's been in America for 5 minutes, and it's like, you did what now? And just there's so much stuff like that.
Also, I'm gonna as quickly betray him for no apparent reason. It was like, wait, what? And the whole I think the one thing you mentioned there about the fascination with Russia during the 80s is so true. But I think with this film, they somehow managed to avoid the typical cliche, which is let's make fun of Russia. They don't do that at all. There's no real like, oh, you guys will do it like a certain way. It's almost like at times they're just saying, actually, your guys' way kind of works, like it's you think it's going to be, hey, we're America, we're a great country, but I think it kind of meets in the middle somewhere.
Yeah, I agree with that. We both have problems. That's kind of what it's saying.
It was, interestingly enough, the first American movie to actually film in Moscow's Red Square as well. And, you can tell it's just all those massive establishing shots at the beginning. I don't know where they filmed the naked scene, but
it was sneaky, wasn't it? Because they didn't actually get permits to do it. I was reading about this and how they kind of had to almost pretend it was a student film that they were filming rather than an action. And like judging from watching the film, there are elements where you'd be like, yeah, this is probably a student film, but I don't think that was the bit that they actually intended to do it like that. But,
and one of your points there, Nigel, about Belushi and his acting and stuff. Apparently, another thing is a lot of the film they actually kind of wrote it as they were filming it. So the fact that Belushi, to begin with, is like, I'm going to go by the book and all of that, and then he just he totally contradicts himself like 2 minutes later, and it's really confusing. But apparently, they just kind of wrote some of the dialogue for him, especially as they went along.
Time to feed parakeet.
What's that, Russian for jerking off?
Which probably, excuses some of those kind of little holes in how it's done. I mean, I personally, it's definitely not Arnie's best film, but I enjoyed how bad it was, if that makes sense.
Yeah, likewise.
I enjoyed, the ridiculousness of that first scene. I was literally, I'm imagining you two watching that and really enjoying that scene.
I did enjoy it. That's the crazy thing. Aside from the last 15 minutes where I think it kind of, the whole bus scene, it kind of falls a bit flat on its face. I think it's it's a decent film. And I think from 1982 to I think about 94, Arnie had a run of films that 15-year-old me thinks every single one is fantastic. Now, if I went back and watched some of those, maybe like Red Sonja, I'd be a bit like, ooh, maybe Raw Deal perhaps. But some of them absolutely stand up. You've got your Predator, you've got, I'd say Commando still stands up today. Running Man, exactly. Total Recall, Kindergarten Cop even to an extent, and then finished at True Lies. Then from that point, I don't think he's done almost a single good film. Maybe one that's average, but nothing that would kind of fit into that period from 82 to 94. And this was the only film from that period that I'd never actually watched up until about maybe a month or two ago, where I kind of had it on in the background whilst I was playing poker with some mates, good old lockdown poker, and I sort of had it back on in the background with subtitles and sort of trying to watch it without actually watching, like you alluded to. It's just what the hell is going on? All of a sudden there's just random people showing up in hotels, shooting guys in bathrooms, and people screaming, and you just
there's a scene in the hospital, and it almost goes Naked Gun style.
It really does with the nurse.
There's a nurse who's running down the ward and is clearly dressed up like a man.
It's clearly a bloke.
And then there's
oh wow, look at that nurse.
Yeah, she's hot. And there's a tray, and then he falls over, and it's like, oh my god, am I seriously watching a spoof right now? And I still found it funny, but it is. I don't think they were trying to be funny, which is the almost tragic thing.
Arnie shoots the nurse 6 times and then runs after. I think he's running after Arnie's already run after Gershon, and then Belushi sits down beside the person who's been shot 6 times and checks the pulse. It's like the person's been. I mean, that is Naked Gun-esque, and like you say, it was almost like when Arnie's running down the corridor and pushes over the thing of the trolley of trays. Yeah. It's like, what? There's a camera set up for that amazing action shot. It's like, oh no. And even the conclusion at the end of the film, like Nigel says, it's so, the last 15 minutes, it's like the wheels just come off, or it's the shopping trolley with the dodgy wheel, where Arnie's got the gun pointed at the baddie, And Belushi's like, oh no, you can't do that. So Arnie's pointing the gun at Belushi now, and it's like, okay. And then literally 5 minutes later, after the most ridiculous scene where Arnie's driving a coach towards, or a bus as the Americans call it, a bus, towards another bus, and they're playing bus chicken.
You ready to swerve? Come on, you ready to swerve?
I'm not going to watch it again. Anyone listening who's not seen it, I'd probably, if you've had a few beers or a spliff or something, you'd probably enjoy it with some friends. I love watching Arnie films for the kind of the comedy and the ridiculousness of them. You know, you get that even in his best films, but seeing it in his worst film is kind of, or one of his worst films, is worth watching for the fun of it.
I think you're being really harsh. I think it's bad. I don't think it's that bad. Well, honestly, I would watch that over anything he's made in the last sort of over 25 years. Like, it's crazy, really. Like, it's cheesy. Well, maybe I'm being a bit too generous, but I think there's elements to it that are okay. But yeah, I just think Belushi brings it down. Like the first 25 minutes, I really enjoyed. Like, as you said, it was a bit ridiculous fighting in the snow, but that was just quintessential Arnie in the 80s. And I think it was actually quite a brave thing for them to do an action film in the 80s where the first 20 minutes, no one speaks a word of English. And it's like, my God, someone actually done that. Yeah.
Well, that's
absolutely.
why I continued watching it. I was like, oh, there'll just be subtitles for a minute. And I thought, I might as well stick with this. And then after, like, I don't know, 15 minutes, I was like, actually, I'm going to have to. So I went on Amazon and paid £5 for the privilege of this film.
Mate, it isn't worth £5.
to rent it for 48 hours. Now I was like, right, I've got to watch the whole film quickly now.
That's reminded me as well. Walter Hill also directed 48 Hours, so yeah. Okay. And Brewster's Millions, which kind of goes against everything I said earlier. Anyway,
I was going to say, like, in terms of, it's funny, I'd watched Warriors over the years, but I watched it the whole way through for the first time about a week ago. I didn't realise he'd directed. Oh, it's a really good film, and kind of dated in that 1980s or late 70s, early 80s thing, but it's a very simple film. Like, it's not. I can start discussing the Warriors very quickly. It's a very simple film. It literally is. We got to get from here to here, but it's the way it's done, and for a film that is so action orientated, there's some really good characters in it, and like character being like a really good word. And plus, it's that seedy 1980s America that I just kind of wish was still around. But yeah, Red Heat.
Basically, Red Heat. We recommend you watch the Warriors.
One of the other things that I noticed when I was watching it is the fighting sound effects. I don't know if you guys know this. Rocky 3 is comic book. This was like I just went peow or push push.
Do you know Miranda?
Never heard of the bitch.
And even the music had like. It wasn't even like 80s at times. It was almost like 70 twangs. Like,
I need to talk about the music as well. So it was actually done by like James Horner, who's was one of the most famous sort of music composers in like the 80s and 90s. He did Titanic, he did Avatar. He also did something I really noticed because there was like this weird panpipey flute sound. Yes. He did Willow. He did like Batteries Not Included. If you look up his list of films, it's absolutely insane what he's done. But yeah, the score for this film, it almost didn't make any sense with what you were actually watching.
I'm glad I watched it. I wouldn't watch it again, but if anyone's listening, yeah, give it a watch. It's a fun film, and I mean, if it wasn't Arnie, like you kind of alluded to at the beginning, E-Talk, if it was one of the others, it probably would be even worse. Like, you know, actually, if that was Stallone, it would have just been ripped. Like,
Stallone as a Russian. Oh my God.
It would have been unwatchable. Yeah.
Or Van Damme, or the Lundgren. You know, like it just. But because it's Arnie, he gets away with being in it, and it's.
Well, one other thing I never realised was when I was sort of growing up, I obviously knew about all these films in kind of that era I mentioned before. I always assumed that Red Heat was one of the really early ones he did when he wasn't really that famous, and it was like, oh, it's just like a random film for Arnie. And I realised he did it like after Terminator and after quite a lot of his sort of bigger profile films. I'm thinking, why the hell did he do? Having watched it, it's like, yeah, why did he do this now? But he really wanted again to work with William Hill, because not William Hill, Walter Hill, because
William Hill.
because he's a gambler. Really wanted to work with Walter Hill and vice versa. And basically, Walter Hill helped write the film just so he could do one with Arnie. And like I said, I think there's elements of Arnie's character that kind of work, but yeah, it kind of dies on its arse a bit at the end. And yeah, it doesn't necessarily hold up as well. And unfortunately, none of us kind of watched it at that point where perhaps we would have engaged with it a bit more.
Maybe had we
15.
watched it in the 80s or even 90s as kids, and then maybe we'd have a bit more affection to it.
You ship drugs to my country, and one morning you will wake up and find your testicles floating in glass of water next to your bed.
I'm a holy man. I got no need for testicles.
Then I settle for your eyes.
All right, so the final word, let's all review it as in how many out of 10 would you give Red Heat? So
surely that's far too many stars to give. Like,
no, I like an out of 10. Although
out
most
of 2.
people.
What do you reckon, Nige?
Now, for me, to be like a 10, it'd have to be ridiculous. I've not seen many 10s. I would say 6 is kind of like a general, oh yeah, if you watched it on Netflix and you thought, oh, that's all right, that's a 6. This I would probably give a 5. It's kind of just below that level. It's, as you say, it's kind of enjoyable enough to watch to a point, but I don't think it's the sort of film you would necessarily go back to loads unless you were in a situation where you literally had one VHS in your house and you just watched it over and over again.
Brilliant. E-Talk, what would you give it out of 10?
I think I was going to go 4, just that. 4 out of 10.
Yeah, okay. I was probably going to go somewhere in the middle of that. So I'd probably go 4.5 out of 10.
How do you Soviets deal with all the tension and stress?
Vodka.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. If you want to get in touch, why don't you join in and maybe suggest a film for us to watch on offradarpod@gmail.com, or you can tweet us at offradarpodcast. Next week, we're going to be chatting through Palm Springs. So if you want to get ahead of the game, why don't you watch that in the next week and join in. Let us know what you think of the film, send in your opinions and views, and we'll see you next time on Off Radar.